Hi, everybody. Happy Halloween. Wait a couple minutes for everyone to join us. I thought we would have some fun tonight in Trinity Church Graveyard. Please be sure to say hello so I know you are here. I don't want to put this mask around my head because I have to take off my hat and get it around my wig, and it would just be too hard. So I'm going to hold it for a few minutes with my hand, but when a bunch of you are here, I am going to take it off so you can see my ghostly makeup. I see people coming in. Hello, hello. It's nice to see everyone. Getting ready for Halloween, I think. Who do we have here? We have Tracy's here. Mr. Tulloch is here. Mr. White is here. Oh boy, lots of people are here. Oh, Jan is here, my neighbor Jan. Oh, this is wonderful. Mr. Davis is here. Liz. Oh, we have a whole bunch of people. I need to put my glasses on to see. So, oh, Miss Oh, 10 is here. Hi, Ken. Well, this is my Halloween mask, but I don't want to wear it because I can't see through it very well. And as I said, I can't get it around my wig. So instead, I have some nice ghostly makeup for you tonight, um, which is a little bit nicer, I think, than the ghostly makeup I used at the cemetery tour last weekend, which didn't come out as good as this. Oh, here we go. Um, Liz Mackey is here. Oh, I'm a Good Rebel Now is here. Hi, Stephanie. Oh, it's great to see so many people. I'm going to take this off for a minute. Last weekend, I did a cemetery tour here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I used a gray makeup base, which looked pretty good. But tonight, I have on my regular makeup with some white powder, which is actually the white hair powder that would have been used in the 18th century. So I put some white powder over it to make me look really light, and some red and white around my eyes, and some rouge and some purple on my lips so that I would look suitably a little ghostly for Trinity Church. And this is, for those of you who don't know, this is Trinity Church, New York City. This is the, excuse me, northern end of the graveyard. So if you're facing the church, it's on the right-hand side of the church if you're on Broadway. And of course, you know, I used to take tours through here and talk about all the graves in the graveyard. So I thought we would talk about some of the people in this graveyard tonight, talk a little bit about Halloween, and just, you know, maybe just really have a good time. Let's see who else. I got some more messages here. Oh, it's Stephanie. Hi, Mrs. Q, Miss Kane. Thank you so much for joining me. So, was there Halloween in Mrs. Q's time in the 18th century? No, there was not a celebration of Halloween. As a matter of fact, if you think of the colonies in the 18th century, we are very Protestant, very religious, very Presbyterian, Congregationalist, Puritan, Lutheran, Moravian, Anabaptist, all sorts of Christian religions, and the observance of Halloween would have been seen as demonic. Now, the closest thing we get to Halloween might be some masquerade balls with some masks like the one I have here, which I really love this mask, but it's really super uncomfortable. It's made of metal, but looks really neat. Some masquerade balls, maybe. Or later during the British occupation, we get something you might have heard of called the Hellfire Club. And the Hellfire Club had all sorts of masquerade things going on, and things that people in America said was blatant devil worship, which I don't think it really was. But because everyone here was so religious and so devout, or most people, you know, it's always people who aren't, but in general, the atmosphere was a very religious one. The Hellfire Club was very much looked down upon, although it was a big hit in London, wasn't it? And Mr. Benjamin Franklin was a member of the London Hellfire Club. Miss Silver's here from Los Angeles. Hello, nice to see you. Thank you for joining me. So there isn't anything really like Halloween, although there are lots of parties in the 18th century. As I mentioned, masquerade balls were popular, where people would dress up, and dress up like historical figures was very popular, or dressing up like members of the royal families, or things like that, you know, popular people or historical figures. And some of those parties would take place in people's homes if they had a ballroom, or at one of the many pleasure gardens here in New York. And there were actually two in New York, and they would have been to the north of us that way, up Broadway. I have to look the other way, up Broadway if you're facing Trinity Church, and a little past where City Hall Park is in your time. One of those was called Ranelagh Gardens, and the other one was over on the Hudson River. It was called Vauxhall. And these pleasure gardens in my time are quite beautiful. They are large gardens with topiaries, fountains, lawns for bands to play on, boxes where maybe the bands would be elevated, lots of different food. All of our famous chefs and cooks from our time would be there cooking. You could buy meals, sit down, lots of drinking, of course, with different types of popular drinks depending on the season. And they were even open in winter where we might find snow sculptures, ice sculptures, skating, music, hot drinks, hot food, and things like that. So the pleasure gardens are very, very popular. They also have, the hedges shaped like animals or shaped like buildings and the beautiful fountains. Some people could walk along the paths in a maze very privately. If you wanted to be alone with someone, you could do that. Or if you were younger and with your friends, it was fun as well to just wander around, sit with your friends, have some hot chocolate and enjoy yourself. Now, in your time, there is a wonderful depiction of, I think it's Vauxhall, London, in a series, I think was done on Masterpiece Theater, as you call it, of Vanity Fair. One of my favorite books. I don't think Mrs. Q would have been around to see it. I forgot when it was published, but certainly one of my favorite books in your time. Vanity Fair is about aristocrat frauds, people who pretend to be aristocrats but are broke and are always one step ahead of paying their bills, along with the real aristocracy as well. And there is a great, I don't know if it's the first or second episode, there is a wonderful scene that takes place at Vauxhall Gardens, London. And you can see the band playing, people walking around, talking to their friends, drinking, eating. It's really a great scene if you want to know what these pleasure gardens were like. And Miss Silver says, and yet so many, mysteries and Halloween style stories are told with the colonial people of the 1600s and 1700s in mind. I know, and especially, I'm sure you're thinking of the Salem witch trials as being a very spooky Halloween type thing in your time. But in our time, it's just a sad part of the history of New England, right? A tragic period in New England history. In New York, we kind of look at all of that silliness that goes on in New England as being superstitious and a little odd, as we don't really believe those things here. But you're probably talking about something like that. Or you may be talking about Mr. Washington Irving's books about the Hudson Valley, which are going to come out a little bit later after my time, a little bit later. But tonight, since I'm a spirit in Trinity Church Graveyard in your time, I think I can talk about all of the intervening years. Of course, Washington Irving, a good friend of Mr. Aaron Burr, is going to travel to London and throughout Europe for some time, around 1800, a little later. And while he's there, he's going to write the stories that are popular in your time about Sleepy Hollow. So Rip Van Winkle, the gentleman who falls asleep and wakes up in the future. And of course, probably the most famous, the Headless Horseman, the Hessian who's riding around the Hudson Valley with his head in his hand, is it? Riding around with his head in his hand. So Washington Irving will write those later, and they're still going to remain popular right into the 21st century, aren't they? So there are stories from the colonial period, but in general, I don't think there's anything all that scary about the colonial period. We're pretty normal people. Probably the most extraordinary thing that we did was fight the American Revolution, didn't we? That we got together and realized that we had an opportunity to separate ourselves from the king and the corrupt aristocracy of England that was exploiting us, to fight them for our freedom and establish our own nation. And there are plenty of scary stories about the war, aren't there? Valley Forge and the men freezing and dying there. General Lafayette saying as he rode to Valley Forge, he saw the bloody footsteps in the snow of the men whose feet were frozen and bleeding as they were trying to walk through the snow. Can you you imagine the horror of that? And other horrors of war, the hot summers, the people who were killed, tortured, and scalped by the native tribes that took the side of the British. Terrible horror stories of the war itself, which are true stories and really don't need any spirits to haunt them. Here we have My Dog Rex. Hi, My Dog Rex is here. I Married a Witch. 19, what did he say? 1935-ish is a very good movie. Don't miss the first 5 minutes. Well, Rex, I will definitely check that out. And Rex wants to remind everyone to please hit the like button on these videos and share them with your friends who are interested in learning about colonial history, specifically colonial New York history. Now, oh, Mr. Facemeyer is here from Manassas. Well, I chose this graveyard to appear to you tonight, Trinity Church Graveyard, because I hear in your time it's a very well-known graveyard, and there are many people from my time, important people, buried in this graveyard. I thought we might mention some of them tonight and mention what they did, and then mention what they might think about your time. I think you find maybe some of their thoughts about the way you live to be rather interesting. So in this side of the graveyard, not far from where I'm standing, we have Mr. Francis Lewis. And Mr. Francis Lewis is a signer, or was, or is a signer of the Declaration of Independence from New York. He is the only signer buried here in Trinity Church. I think the only signer buried in Manhattan, one of our four. And Rex corrects that. He says the movie is from 1942. I Married a Witch. 1942, that would be probably pretty interesting. The makeup in that, I'm sure, is amusing. So Mr. Francis Lewis, who had a really interesting life. He was a merchant. If you, in your time, live in Queens, New York City, there's a big street called Francis Lewis Boulevard, which is where the Francis Lewis family farm was. He was also a merchant, and during the French and Indian War, he was captured, fought in the French and Indian War. He was captured. They put him in a crate and shipped him to France, where they kept him as a prisoner. They shipped him in a crate to France. Mr. Lewis survived that, came back to New York, became a delegate to the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, and later signed the Declaration of Independence on behalf of New York. So, I think he would be right about there. On the north side, right about there, is Francis Lewis is buried. If you go to the graveyard, face the church, walk along on the right side of the church, and you'll see his grave right there with a special marker saying that it's Francis Lewis. Right up on the walkway, or I should say right up in front of Broadway on the street, you'll also see a whole row of graves there. And those are all gentlemen from the same family who served as officers in the Revolutionary War. And one of them was J.M. Scott, or John Moran Scott, who in his younger days was a political Whig. He was a member of something called the Whig or Wicked Triumvirate with Mr. William Smith Jr. and Mr. William Livingston, and they published a very controversial newspaper called the Independent Reflector. One of my favorite newspapers, of course. The Independent Reflector was only out for about 18 months because they managed to offend everyone in the town so much that no one would print it anymore. So if you are offending all political factions on, rather regularly, you are probably telling a lot of the truth most of the time. And so those three young men became known as the Wicked Triumvirate. Two of the three of them were educated at Yale, which our governor at that time, Cadwallader Colden, referred to as the Nursery of Sedition and Rebellion. Now, two of those gentlemen in the Wicked Triumvirate, Mr. Livingston and Mr. Scott, will become rebels, or patriots as you call them, during the Revolutionary War. Mr. Smith will remain a loyalist, very shocking to everyone at that time. Well, buried right up there on Broadway is Mr. J.M. John Moran Scott, who at one time with his law partners fought a major legal battle against the opening of a school called King's College, which you know as Columbia University, just up the street here from us on Broadway. King's College was originally opened as a part of Trinity Church. It was meant to be an Anglican school, and there was all sorts of debate over whether the taxpayers of the city ought to pay for a religious school, an Anglican school, when only 17% of the town were Anglicans. Well, that whole thing eventually worked itself out, so that King's College did open, but there were other than Anglicans on its board of directors. And after a period of time, the tax was ended and the graduates of the school supported the school. Oh, and they also agreed to admit young men of all religious backgrounds. So Mr. Scott was a member of that, so shall I say, um, um, arguing party against the opening of King's College. Now, interesting, isn't it, though, that Mr. Scott is buried here at Trinity Church? And in his burial epitaph, if you look it up, it says, "Herein lies John Moran Scott, who was a thorn in the side of this church. Every day he walked this earth." So the great J.M. Scott, who's just up here on the walkway. Also to the left of me is that very mysterious grave, which says Charlotte Temple. And of course, there is no person called Charlotte Temple, but there is a grave there with her name on it. Well, Charlotte Temple was a book published in the 1790s by Mrs. Susanna Rawson, about a young girl who gets seduced by a British officer in London, comes to New York with him, lives with him for a time. They do not marry, and then he abandons her while she's expecting a child. It's a very dramatic book. She gets abandoned while she's expecting. She gets thrown out of her home. And eventually, her father finds she's here in New York and arrives here just as she's giving birth to a baby girl, and she dies. He takes the baby back to London with him, and she is buried in the book in Trinity Graveyard. But there is really no Charlotte Temple. So why is there a gravestone here? There are many stories about who this might be. Now, the story is in part a true story about a British captain and cartographer, engineer named John Montresor. And the author, Mrs. Susanna Rawson, is his first cousin. And Captain Montresor was known to leave a number of children in his wake during the years he lived in America. He did marry a local loyalist woman, wealthy woman, as the villainous, what's his name? I can't remember his name in the book. As he does in the book, he abandons Charlotte for a wealthy loyalist woman. Well, Captain Montresor did do that. If you're in New York, you know there's Randall's Island in the East River, once called Montresor's Island, as he owned it and lived there. And he left quite a few children behind when he went back to England, one of them being one of Ethan Allen's later wives. So why is there the grave that says Charlotte Temple? Well, some people say that the story is true, and this is the real young woman that Captain Montresor abandoned. Others say it was a publicity stunt for a mid-19th century edition of the book, which in the front cover has a picture of this gravestone. So some believe the gravestone was just a publicity stunt for the book. So the grave of Charlotte Temple is up also by Broadway in that direction. Someone says, sounds like the Bible story of King David. Oh, Rex. Oh, Rex, always getting into trouble here, Rex. So I don't think I will go in that direction at this time. Now, also in the graveyard in this direction is Mr. Robert Livingston, the Chancellor Robert Livingston, who swore in George Washington as president. Also in that gravesite is his son-in-law, Robert Fulton, who built the first steamship and named it for his father-in-law's estate, the Claremont. Now, many of you are going to say, but Mrs. Q, on the other side of the graveyard is the monument to Robert Fulton near Mr. Hamilton's grave. And that is true. There is a monument on the south side of the graveyard, but that is just a monument. Mr. Fulton is buried over here with his father-in-law, Mr. Livingston. There are a number of other people in that grave, and unusually also in that grave site is Mrs. Angelica Schuyler Church, as she was cousin to the Livingstons. Why she's buried here and not with the other Schuylers, I really can't tell you, but she is buried here. And of course, in your time, that makes the grave site very popular with young girls who want to see the grave of Angelica Schuyler, because you have that musical in your time, right, about Mr. Hamilton. If we go a little further behind the church, we find the gravesite of the Alexander family. So we have James Alexander, a great lawyer, by the way, who trained a couple of the gentlemen in the Wicked Triumvirate and was the lawyer for John Peter Zenger in the famous free speech case of 1735. But interestingly, in that grave is his wife, um, Mary Alexander, Mary Sprott Prevost Alexander, who you may know was the greatest lady merchant of her time, one of the greatest in our colonial history, coming from a family of great women merchants on the Dutch side of her family. Her grandmother was a great merchant, and Mrs. Alexander was a great merchant. At one time, it was said that there was not a ship in the docks anywhere in New York that did not have stock bound for Mrs. Alexander's shop. She had a beautiful home on Pearl Street, and her son, William Alexander, is the gentleman you may know of as Lord Stirling, or Major General Lord Stirling, one of General Washington's closest friends and generals in the Revolutionary War. It was Mrs. Alexander's great fortune who outfitted her son and her son's regiments when there was no money coming from the Continental Congress. So a great family along the walkway behind the church, the Alexander family, all of them buried there together. Lovely gravesite. The Alexanders used to be under a path that you walked on. It was quite awful, and the gravestone was broken. And they did some recent construction on the church and put the gravestone in a new spot. And they have a nice frame around it and flowers. It's done very nicely, and the family is honored in a manner they should be. And as you get around to the other side of the graveyard, the south side toward the back of the church, you'll see Mr. Thomas Randall, a captain in the Revolutionary War, and you'll see the grave of John Lamb, the great General John Lamb, commander of New York's 1st Artillery Unit. And Mr. Lamb was himself a merchant. He was also one of the leaders of the New York Sons of Liberty. I think he was a wine merchant specifically, and a very charismatic and well-spoken gentleman, and was often one of the members of the Sons of Liberty who would publicly speak. He did serve as a general, as I mentioned, artillery general in the Revolutionary War. And in your time, Lamb's 1st New York Artillery is an active reenactment unit, and you should go to see them if you ever see a notice that they'll be appearing near you. And that is the great Mr. John Lamb. Right near John Lamb is Marinus Willett, another member of the New York Sons of Liberty and a colonel in the Revolutionary War, known for his defense of Fort Stanwix or Fort Schuyler in the year 1777, when British General St. Leger and his Iroquois allies were on their way to attack that fort. Colonel Willett was known for his defense of that fort and his later defense of the Mohawk Valley. Colonel Willett became mayor of New York later. He was also an anti-federalist and a good friend of Mr. Aaron Burr. And after the duel with Burr and Hamilton, was one of the men who was charged with murder here in New York as an accessory to the murder of Alexander Hamilton. Oh, the politics at that time was just terrible. And of course, nothing happened to any of those men because it wasn't murder, it was a legal duel. But you know how those politicians are. So the great Marinus Willett is buried there. You think, who else do we have along there? We have near Marinus Willett, the great Hercules Mulligan, a tailor here in New York, and also many of you know a spy during the Revolutionary War who aided both the Culper and Merseyrail spy rings. I'm trying to think. There's also, Mr. Fulton's monument is there. And next to Mr. Fulton is Mr. Hamilton's grave and monument. And of course, you know who Alexander Hamilton was, and many other important soldiers and important people from the Revolutionary War period here. Just up Broadway, we come to Trinity Church, where there's also an array of soldiers and rebels buried at Trinity Church, including my favorite printer, Mr. John Holt, the Liberty printer of New York. Now, let's take a minute and think about what all of these gentlemen and their ladies, of course, did to create our nation, right? They all suffered tremendously, didn't they? Many lost their homes. They lost their wealth, their money. Some lost their lives. their family members' lives. They risked everything to separate from England so that we could be our own nation. We all joined together in spite of our differences and fought England for our freedom, which was won at a terrible cost, but it was won. And then we went on to create our nation. Our idea being that we were all many different people with many different ideas, with each of our colonies being like separate little countries, but that if we came together, we could have our own country and at least govern ourselves and argue among ourselves about what the country would be. And we were able to establish that. So it's quite an incredible feat that we attained, isn't it? I think being the only colonies at that time to separate from our mother country successfully and form a nation that would go on to become more powerful than our mother country. So since I'm in your time tonight as a spirit from my time, which gives me access to all the things happening in your time, what would some of these gentlemen think about your time? Now let's think about Colonel Marinus Willett or the printer John Holt up at St. Paul's Graveyard, both of whom were outspoken opponents of the Stamp Act. Oh, and of course, Mr. J.M. Scott, who wrote against the Stamp Act as well, and Mr. Chancellor Livingston over here. So many people here who are against the Stamp Act. Remember that tax on paper, which united us all for the first time. So they were against the Stamp Act, against the Quartering Act, and against the Tea Act. All ways in which the British aristocracy sought to use us to help them find a way out of their financial indiscretions. And so we separated from them. We saw all of those things as a violation of our rights as British subjects. And what were those things? Well, the Stamp Act was a tax, right, on the use primarily of paper, but other items as well, all types of paper. The Quartering Act said we had to pay for an army to stay here during peacetime. But standing armies during peacetime were in violation of the Bill of Rights of the Glorious Revolution of 1689. So if we were British subjects, as we saw ourselves, this Quartering Act was illegal. We could not have a standing army among us during that time. Or did England see us as an enemy and thus could have an army here? And so we refused the Quartering Act. The Tea Act we saw as an attempt to, in your words, your time, bail out the East India Company, right? Too big to fail is what it was. Similar to the too big to fail in your time when you bailed out your banks. We, however, were smart enough not to bail out the East India Company. And even though we were warned that if we didn't buy the tea, the East India Company would fail and the British Empire would fail with it, none of that happened, did it? We didn't buy the tea. We threw it into the water. It caused our war, which was coming, would have happened with or without what we call the Boston Tea Party, and allowed us to establish a new nation here. So, what do you think all of the people here who fought so hard for all of that would think about you allowing your government to remove taxes from your pay before you receive your pay? We threatened to hang up the stamp agents on poles if they tried to distribute the stamped paper. Imagine what we would have done had the king notified us that the parliament was entitled to a portion of our wages before they were paid. Do you think the governors would have survived that? Or do you think the governors would have been dragged through the town, hanged, and their bodies left to rot as a warning to England? Yet you allow the government to take money from your pay before you receive it. Is that in the spirit of why we fought the American Revolution? Think about it. Half your pay, I hear, and you get no receipt. In my time, when we pay our taxes, we know what the money goes to because our taxes are local. So we pay our taxes, and then our local government has to publish annually all of the amount of money they spent and what they spent it on. So we know what our tax money is what it's being spent on. You don't know that, I hear. Half of your earnings. To where? Do you trust that the government isn't stealing from you? We know in our time that all government is evil. All government works against the people, and that it's a difficult battle between government and the people to ensure our liberty and freedom while still having just enough government to keep order and to handle some of the financial things that need to be handled. That it's always a struggle between the government and the people, that we are natural enemies of each other. We know that in my time. And we knew even when we established our new government that the trend would be to more and more government, with the worst and worst people in that government looking to steal from the people and enrich themselves. How did we know that? Because it has always happened. It has always happened. Yet in your time, you give so much of your earnings to a government that tells you nothing about what they do with that money. And I heard, according to the warnings of our good friend and brilliant lady, Mrs. Mercy Otis Warren, that your senators stay in office for life into their 80s and 90s. How can that be? Didn't Mrs. Warren warn us about this at the time of the establishment of the Constitution? That because there was no rotation, as we call it, or you might call it term limits, because there was no rotation in this Constitution, that senators would never leave, that they would become like lords, like the House of Lords, and they would create an aristocracy of themselves above us, governing over us rather than governing for us. So what have you done? That you have your senators in office until they're in their 80s and 90s, 30, 40, or 50 years. How could they not be corrupt? We don't understand in our time how you could allow such a thing. How you could allow your tax money to be used for, of all things, banks. Banks. One of the worst entities on the earth that we know very well here. We would never allow our money to be used to aid a bank, which was indirectly what the Tea Act was, wasn't it? Because the Tea Act owed great amounts of money to the Bank of England. The Bank of England needed that money. So they looked to us to buy their tea to repay their debt to the Bank of England. And we said no. And the Bank of England survived, as did the East India Company. Yet you let your tax money go to banks. Now, what about you have something called interest on loans, which I hear is something like 25 to 30%. That's usury. That's a quarter of the balance. Yet your elected representatives allow it. They allow it, which seems to me that they're not working in your favor. What do you think the men and women in this graveyard would think of these things? What do you think they would think of this? Two political parties that have completely lost sight of the people, like the Whigs and Tories of England did. Didn't all of this happen because the Whigs and Tories in England had forgotten about what was in the best interest, not only of the people of England, but the people of the American colonies? They completely forgotten about the general welfare of subjects of the crown because they were so locked in conflict with each other for wealth and power that they'd forgotten about the people, which is what led to the Revolutionary War and why all of these people did the things that they did to separate from them, to get rid of them, and to get rid of a king. And I hear your president has something called an executive order that he can issue to bypass your elected representatives in the Congress. Do you think we would have tolerated that in the king? According to the Glorious Revolution, the king could not pass any legislation without permission of the parliament, and specifically the commons, the voice of the people. Yet you seem to now have a king, a president, more powerful than the king that we thought was abusing us. So I'm asking on this Halloween for you to think about the Revolutionary War veterans and their families and people of the late 18th century, early 18th century, 17th century, all of the people who settled this land and fought for it to be separate from Great Britain, all of those people, think about why they did what they did and ask what would they think of the America of 2025? And is there a way to remedy all of the things that have happened in those times? I also hear you have wars in places you can't find on a map, very much like the London of our time, fighting wars in places in the world the people of England couldn't even find, didn't even know where they were, yet they were required to pay taxes for generations to pay for those wars. Wars we didn't want to pay for because they weren't our wars and they weren't fought in our interest and they weren't fought for us. Another reason we separated from England. So not that I want to bring you down or make you feel like your time is so bad, just like you to consider what the 18th century was about. Consider all of the years I did my Revolutionary War tours, over 20 years. I walked people through both graveyards and explained who the people were, men, women, children, members of the clergy, members of the press, lawyers, doctors, merchants, artisans, all of the people in these graveyards and what they endured during the Revolutionary War era in order to break away from England and establish a new nation. For over 20 years, I told people their stories. And so tonight I'm telling you a little bit of their stories, as I do every week, in the hopes that those stories will make you think of the modern time through different eyes and maybe look to ways that can remedy some of the problems of the 21st century that you are in and that I'm visiting just tonight as a ghost. So do you have any questions or comments or anything you want to say about Halloween or the American Revolution tonight before we say goodnight to each other? No, I'm not going to be dressed up trick-or-treating tomorrow night, but I am going to be an event on Saturday, before I forget. If you are in northeastern Pennsylvania, in the Poconos region, I will be at the Tannersville Fire Department with the 24th Connecticut Militia Regiment. We will have Mrs. Q's shop in operation where you can come and try on, if you're a lady, 18th century clothes, hats, wigs, and see what you would look like in the 18th century. Or you can walk around to the rest of our reenactors and you can learn about medicine at that time. You can learn about weaponry of the time, cooking, spinning, and all sorts of other ways that we lived in the 18th century. So if you're in the Pocono region, please come out to see us on Saturday. Otherwise, I will be back on Republic Broadcasting Network Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can find me there at republicbroadcasting.org. Also, please check out my Patreon if you have time. I am Mrs. Q History on Patreon, and I just finished taking an 18th century chemise, which is the little dress that we wear under our clothes, and making a modern version out of crinkle gauze to wear as a nightgown. And I'll be posting that video in a day or two, but there are pictures there if you'd like to see it. So come on over to my Patreon and support my work if you can. There's also a free membership available on Patreon. Hello, Mr. Davis. Happy Halloween to you as well. Happy Halloween to everyone. I hope there aren't too many ghouls and scares wherever you are. And if you have children, they have a really great time going out trick-or-treating. So until next time, this is History with Mrs. Q from the beautiful Trinity Church Graveyard at Broadway and Wall Street in Lower Manhattan. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.